Who is Jane Goodall? When Jane Goodall was a little more than a year old, her father gave her a toy animal. It wasn't a soft, cuddly puppy or kitten or bunny. It was a big chimpanzee. Why did Jane's father choose a chimp? It was 1935. A baby chimpanzee had been born at the London Zoo. Jane's parents lived in London and followed the news about the little chimp named Jubilee. Why was it such a big event? Before then, all the zoo's chimps had been born in the wild in Africa. Jane's toy chimp was named Jubilee. The chimp was too scary for a baby girl. Jubilee gave Jane bad dreams. But they were wrong. Jane loved Jubilee and took the toy wherever she went. As a very young child, Jane Goodall had no idea that she would spend most of her life among chimpanzees. Real, live chimpanzees. But that's what she did. Not live in a zoo. They roamed free in the forests of eastern Africa. Over time, the chimps began to treat Jane just like another chimp. Because the chimps accepted her, Jane Goodall was able to learn more about these amazing animals than anybody had before. She saw how chimps worked and played together. She learned how chimps showed happiness, fear, anger. Jane Goodall proved to the world how alike humans and chimpanzees are. As for Jubilee, the toy chimp, Jane never gave it away. To this day, Jubilee sits on a dresser in the house where Jane lived. People will look at a picture of a chimpanzee and say it's a monkey. But chimps are not monkeys. Chimps are apes. So are gorillas and orangutans. Apes do not have tails. Almost all kinds of monkeys do. Apes have strong arms and can swim. Most monkeys can't do this. They run along the tops of the branches. Ape skeletons look very much like human skeletons. Monkey skeletons look much more like the skeletons of dogs, cats, and other small mammals. The Animal Kingdom. Chapter 1. Animal Lover. Jane Goodall was born on April 3rd, 1934, in London, England. London is one of the world's greatest cities. Jane, however, was far happier in the country. Most were animals, all kinds of animals. Learning about them in books was interesting, but facts from books were not enough for Jane. Jane wanted to find out about animals by watching them herself. One time she dug up some earthworms. She came home and put them under her pillow. Little Jane was disappointed, but returned the worms to the garden. When she was about 5, Jane was curious to see how chickens laid eggs. In the backyard at her grandmother's house was a chicken coop. Here was Jane's chance to watch an egg get laid. She had Jubilee with her. She crept into the empty chicken coop. Then she waited for a hen to arrive. Jane stayed so still that the hen didn't notice her. Hour after hour went by. Jane kept waiting and watching. Finally, after 5 hours, Jane saw what she had hoped for. Out popped an egg from underneath the chicken. Jane was excited. Her family, however, was scared. Her mother had called the police to report that Jane was missing. But when Jane returned to the house, she did not get a scolding. Her mother understood that Jane was not being naughty. She needed to learn about the natural world in her own special way. Jane's mother was called Van. She wrote novels. Jane's father, Mortimer, was an engineer who later became a race car driver. On Jane's 4th birthday, her sister Judy was born. Imagine sharing the same birthday as your sister or brother. The Goodall girls were young when the World War II broke out in 1939. Adolf Hitler was the Nazi leader of Germany and Austria. He was trying to seize control of all Europe, including England. Right before the war, Jane's family was living in France. Her father was racing cars there. However, once the war started, the family returned to England. Mortimer joined the British Army in the fight against the Nazis. Van and her 2 younger daughters moved with Van's mother, who lived in the seaside town of Bournemouth, a little more than 100 miles from London. Bournemouth was safer than living in London, which the Germans started bombing in September of 1940. The Blitzkrieg. In German, Blitzkrieg means lightning war. The term is used for surprise attacks from the air. On September 7, 1940, German planes flew over London and dropped bombs on the city. The attacks lasted for more than 8 months. It was a frightening time. Often the raids happened at night. Often there was little or no warning before the bombing started. People would run and hide underground in the subway stations. When the bombing stopped, they'd return to the streets and see the rubble where buildings had stood only minutes before. About 30,000 people died because of the bombings. Another 50,000 were injured. Even so, the British never surrendered to the Germans. The war ended in Europe in the spring of 1945 with Germany's defeat. The Goodalls' first home in London remained standing. However, more than 1 million buildings had been destroyed. It took decades to rebuild London. In 1943, Van and her daughters moved into their own home in Bournemouth. Jane spent the rest of her childhood there. Jane was 8 at the time. By then, Mortimer was living apart from his wife and daughters. Jane was most happy when she was outdoors with a neighborhood dog named Rusty. She started a nature club with her sister and 2 friends. Jane had lots of rules for the club. Jane, of course, was the leader. Members had to be able to identify all sorts of different animals. Each member had a code name. The club was fun and interesting. But Jane's friends thought sometimes she was too bossy. Jane also loved reading books about animals. The story of Dr. Dolittle by Hugh Lofting was one of her favorites. Dr. Dolittle went to Africa and was able to talk to wild animals. Jane understood that she would never be able to carry on a conversation with a tiger or giraffe or monkey, but she knew it was possible to live in Africa close to the wild animals. By the time she was 10, she had decided that's exactly what she was going to do with her life. In 1952, Jane's parents were divorced. She didn't ever lose touch with her father, but she was never close to him the way that she was with Van. Tarzan, the jungle hero. Tarzan, a human raised by apes in the African jungle, was the hero of the best-selling novel by Edgar Rice Burroughs. The first book, Tarzan of the Apes, was published in 1914. The first Tarzan movie appeared in 1918, before there were talkies. Since then, there have been almost 90 movies made about the adventures of Tarzan. The most popular ones came out in the 1930s and the 1940s. They starred Johnny Weissmuller, a former Olympic swimmer. Tarzan's best friend was a chimp named Cheetah, and his girlfriend was named Jane. Jane Goodall has said that the Tarzan movies made a big impression on her. Tarzan was living her dream life. Jane was graduating from high school. Although she had been a very good student, there was not enough money for college, so Jane moved to London and took a job as a secretary. The city was a thrilling place to live. However, Jane told her mother and grandmother that her work was dull. It made her miserable. Through a friend, she found a job at a company that made documentary films. That was much more interesting. Still, Jane never stopped dreaming of Africa. To live there and find work studying animals in their natural homes. The odds were not in Jane's favor. First of all, in the 1950s, scientists studied animals in zoos or labs, not in the wild. Animal scientists had years of education. Jane Goodall had no college degree. And at that time, even women with degrees were limited in their career choices. Most became teachers or went into nursing. So, how would Jane find a way to live the life she longed for?